Well, tonight we continue. We started off and we went off on some tangents and got some good background information just to talk about topics that we never have time to talk about. But tonight we wanted to go through the issues. But
Okay.
just in case, there may be somebody out there who doesn't know you, let's start with an introduction.
John Fernandes, State Representative, 10th Worcester District, Milford, Mendon, Hopedale, and a part of Medway.
I always love that part. Can we trade off a street and get like 2 streets of Milford and get 2 more reps to help you?
No, we don't want to do that. We're good the way it is. Actually, I represent Medway because I represent one of the 4 precincts.
Well, that's why I always laughed. I said,
Yeah.
how do you represent part of a town?
I don't. I represent the
So
whole
you've
town.
got-
I get elected by a part of the town. I represent the entirety of the town, along with Jeff Roy, who represents Franklin and the rest of Medway. Good partner.
So now, John, there's a whole bunch of issues we could start with. Why don't I let you, is it electricity? Is it the budget? What would you like to start with?
Wherever you want to go. We'll start any way you want.
Well, probably the thing closest, nearest and dearest to everybody's pocketbook,
Yeah.
electricity.
Yes.
I've seen my rates go up more than the 1.5% for inflation. What's going on?
What's going on is that our electric delivery is a lot different than it used to be. And we have been moving offline plants that rely upon coal. Nuclear is going to be going offline at some point in time, the older plants, unless they can be rehabilitated. And we've been putting online plants that rely upon natural gas for fuel. Natural gas has been cheap and reliable. The problem for us is we don't have any of it naturally up here, so it's all brought in, pipeline or otherwise. Some of it's shipped in, actually. You see those big tanks down off the Quincy area. So what happens is the electric suppliers, the delivery agencies, the national grids, the N-Stars, and the smaller ones, go out with RFPs for power twice a year. They have their winter rates and they have their summer rates. And what happened to us was that around September of last year, 2014, they got, in response to RFPs, some very high pricing because there was uncertainty about what kind of gas was going to be available. Natural gas supplies were going to be available to get into the region. So the pricing was high. They file a motion with the DPU based upon their RFP response for proposals for the supply. And when that part of their bill goes up, the supply part, there's 4 parts to the bill: delivery, administration, distribution, and the supply. When that part of the bill goes up, because of that, they file a motion with the DPU. The DPU reviews it, the Attorney General gets a copy, the Attorney General reviews it, and what they review it for essentially is compliance with the bidding process. Not so much whether the price is good or bad. And if it's appropriately done, then they're entitled to get a rate increase. So around September 23rd of last year, I get an email from N-Star, National Grid, the National Grid legislative liaison, saying, "Oh, just want to give you guys a heads up. You're going to get notice rates are going up by 37%. And it's like shake of the head. What are you talking about? November 1st, by the way, is when the rates are going to go up. So I do some research. I contact the DPU. It's a weekend, actually, so I go on record. I go online, and I'm able to discover this motion's been filed. I see the Attorney General's CC'd on the thing. It's a 104-page motion, and it's approved. It's filed on like September 17th and approved on September 23rd. And I'm saying, did I miss a hearing? What happens? Because we usually get notice of hearings. Well, the process, as I learned, is that there are no hearings. It's just what I described to you. They do a desk review, and if it's appropriate, it's allowed. So I talked to the Attorney General's people about it because I wasn't really very happy about that process. It's explained to me, look, we don't want to be going out, this is a public policy issue. Do we want them going out on a weekly basis or spot basis to get pricing and watch our rates go like this?
Right.
Now, last year in 2013, I'm told, it worked favorably. in that the rates they locked in at were actually lower than the gas prices actually came out at. This year, as it turns out, it was unfavorable because not only did our rates go up substantially, but the price of gas went down because we did get some gas shipped in that wasn't expected. And the consequence was gas prices were down. And if you heated your home with gas, you actually saw your rates go down. And you will find, and it's already been announced, National Grid has said, they're the first ones out of the box. They said their rates for the spring, summer are going to go down by 25% because they've gone out to bid for the summer rates, and the numbers are down based upon the supply expectations, and so they lock it in. So it's this policy decision, which do you go with? We do it ourselves at home with heating oil. Do you want to lock in for the winter, or do you want to float? Well, the policy right now is to float. I mean, it's to lock in.
Lock in.
So I've approached this from one direction, which is I filed legislation to say I don't like this process. I think we ought to be going out early with the RFPs, and I think we ought to have a hearing at which people get an opportunity to question this process and question the substance of it. Now that doesn't exactly get at the policy decision I just talked to you about, but it was quick. You know, we had November 1st increases. Businesses got hurt worse than residentials. And I needed to do something in January to file legislation. So I said, look, let me attack the process first and see if that leads us to some substantive discussion about the best way to handle this. Subsequently, so that legislation's been filed. It'll get a hearing. We'll see what happens in terms of the process. Subsequently, Dave Linsky, who chairs the House Post-Audit and Oversight, has subpoena power, has indicated he is going to do hearings on the rate increases. So we're going to get some substantive evaluation of this issue one way or the other. We can't be living with these kinds of increases and expect people to be able to budget successfully their home budgets. And we can't have business rates going up by 75% and expect companies to particularly do heavy manufacturing in Massachusetts and are, you know, the advanced manufacturing companies very, very electricity demanding when they can get rates outside of this area, outside of this region, significantly cheaper. We can't expect them to continue to be loyal to us in Massachusetts and the New England region. It's a New England problem. It's not just Massachusetts. We can't expect them to be loyal to us under those circumstances. There are pipelines coming online.
I was going to say, now, to me, if I could ask, I hear we went up 37%. Inflation is 1.5%. Now, be happy we're down 25%.
I didn't say be happy. I said we are going down 25%.
I was going to say, because somewhere
it's
in
a good trend that we're going down, not up.
But I see
I'm not
12%
defending it.
that I'll give 1.5% back for inflation.
Yeah, this isn't that kind of negotiation situation. This is all about the price of gas and the availability of it. And, you know, we've talked about, there's a tension. You would think the simple answer is, well, just build more pipelines, get more gas up here.
Bigger pipe.
And there are pipelines being built that are going to be going online as soon as 17. There's another very controversial one, Kinder Morgan, that's
People are
talking about
fighting it, going around Massachusetts. And
well, the fight about gas pipelines is really a policy debate in that those who feel we are too reliant upon fossil fuel and need to move away from it feel that the building of infrastructure institutionalizes the reliance upon it for a longer period of time and then takes away the support for renewables.
So it's going to slow down the conversion?
It's going to slow down the conversion to renewables. So it's a philosophical, political, policy debate about what we do. My response to that is, if we're thinking long-term, being decades in making this transition, building a pipeline that's going to benefit us in the short term, and I'm saying 10 years from today to 10 years from now or 20 years from now, it's not in controversy with trying to move away from reliance on fossil fuels. We want to, I mean, obviously the natural gas issue is as controversial as it is, not just because of reliance on fossil fuel, but the fracking issue. And if you've seen any of the documentaries on it, you know that it's a very, very controversial policy. And it's not limited to the West. It's happening in the Atlantic states.
Well, you see it in Pennsylvania.
You see it in Pennsylvania.
People can't drink
their
water.
Very strong level in Pennsylvania. And it's not impossible to consider that it could come to New England and Massachusetts. So that's part of the controversy around the use of natural gas. But we made this conversion away from coal to natural gas over the last decade plus. It's not easy to just turn our backs and say we're now going to convert all these plants somehow otherwise. We've got to keep reliable, affordable energy flowing into Massachusetts for homeowners and for businesses. And in order to do that, we have to break the tension between the fossil fuel debate, the fracking debate, and the renewables, such that we can bring enough natural gas in
I guess I just
to
don't
produce
see
the electricity at a
conflict,
reliable price.
because when we moved from coal to natural gas, it was moving from A to B. We knew what B was. We made a decision. Now you're saying we want to move from B to...
Renewables.
But what does that mean?
Hydro, solar, wind.
Do we
all the
have an end
varieties.
game there? I mean,
Sure there is. It's a very sophisticated analysis and development that's going on in all of those areas. You know, the
but is
issue
there
with
enough? I guess my problem is, will we have enough
it's gonna
solar,
be-
hydro
it-
in 10 years to take over?
I don't have the answer to that, but I know it's a blend. Obviously,
Okay.
we want to balance it and reduce our dependence. Ultimately, the goal would be elimination, but you want to reduce your dependence, and trying to look in the direction of solar, look in the direction of hydro, look in the direction of wind and conservation. Conservation's a huge part of the solution to the fuel, certainly the electrical issue. I mean, we are seeing significant strides in conservation that each of us can do to our own homes that can reduce our uses dramatically. Businesses are going to it. Drive down the Mass Pike this week, and you're going to see solar
Panels
solar
everywhere.
panels being built on the exits. I mean, this is part of the overall plan. There's a very sophisticated industry out there in renewables, and we are pursuing it with great vigor in Massachusetts, and have throughout the 8 years that I've been in the legislature. The issue for that is reliability and affordability, and when they become reliable and affordable, we're not wedded to any one type of power. You know, there's always a shift in industries. It's always going to be pushback from established industries. Don't close us down.
Right.
We have people who work for us. We're making profits. You
Don't
don't
close
want to
the
close
nuclear
us down.
plants.
Yeah, don't close us down, because there's a vested interest in keeping it alive. Whether it's a good policy, environmental decision to keep something alive, there are people who depend on every industry, people who make profits off of it. And so you've got an inherent tension and resistance to change. But ultimately, when something becomes reliable and affordable, then government and business and the marketplace will move, and you will find solutions to those problems. So it's a long road to travel from this entire debate about renewables, reliance on fossil, getting pipelines in place, to the bill that went up by 37% and is going to come down by 25%, and that not being enough, and that kind of fluctuation not being acceptable. But it is a comprehensive debate that goes on. So I'm trying to target that process, so we have better notice and better understanding and an opportunity to be heard. We're going to get at the substance of this with Dave Linsky's hearings to see what went on, and the debate will continue on what we should do about it.
Another subject close to home, the budget.
Which one? Mine? Yours?
I was saying the governor's budget, the House, the Senate. I mean,
The governor's been out with his budget. We give him a little extra time to form and file his budget, and in respect to what he ended up doing, there is a reality that he's only had a couple of months to put that idea together, and it's a big budget with a lot of line items. He made certain promises during the campaign. So unlike past years, for instance, where Governor Patrick was kind of resistant to put in big increases in local aid, for instance, or education aid, Governor Baker made the promise he was going to go there, and so his local aid increases and Chapter 70 increases really are pretty equal to what we've done in the legislature the last couple of years, and so the likelihood is that his numbers become the numbers, as opposed to previous years where we would bump them up a little bit, because there was room for us to bump them up a little bit. I'm speculating based upon, I think, reliable information that, the extra 100 million or so he put into Chapter 70 and the, I think, 35 million or so that he put into local aid are probably good numbers, and that we're going to end up around that number. Now, we're chipping around the edges then. The numbers in special education, not really where we want them to be. We might have a little bit of room there. Regional transportation, we might have a little bit room there to increase. He eliminated a bunch of targeted grant programs like kindergarten grants. We're making efforts in the legislature to restore those. Those grants mean money to my district, and those things like the reimbursements for special education mean something to my
Well, the
district.
kindergarten program,
Yeah.
I mean, we're looking at $150,000-ish that I don't think anybody in Milford really wants to go back from full-day kindergarten.
No, it wouldn't be advisable.
But without the grant, we've got to come up with 150 or more.
Right. So when you see increases in certain line items, but decreases in others, you can celebrate the one, but you've got to be cautious about the second, and then when you put them all together, you realize, well, maybe it's not as much. So we're looking at ways to adjust that, but the governor, looked at things that he had made promises about and increased funding in those areas, and then, as I look at the budget, for most of the budgetary line items, the department line items, there was a lot of level funding that went on, which we know does not mean level service. And so many of those departments are complaining we can't function. We're going to be taking steps backward. And even the courts to have sub-level funding and some reductions that they're talking about significant layoffs and really step backward from where they were trying to get to restore what they lost during the recession. So level funding to them, when they took the hits that they took during the recession, is really not restoring funding. And then you have things like the kindergarten grant we mentioned, but I do a lot of work in the manufacturing area, and we have a dozen programs that range from $1 million to $25 million for the life sciences. That the $1 million for vocational equipment replacement for the vocational schools to $25 million for the life sciences cuts all around. Significant either zero out or reductions in those line items. So I'm going to be fighting to try and restore those. Well, where's the balance going to come? We'll see. So there's a lot of priority setting that's going to be going on with the governor's budget and the legislative budget, because as much as the governor likes to say he thinks we have a spending problem and not a revenue problem, I like to say we have a demand problem, not a spending problem, because we can only spend what we raise, and what we raise does not match the demand that is placed before us. So within each silo of government, we are trying to meet the demands as best we can and prioritizing in every one of those silos which are the programs that are going to be funded and which are the ones that aren't. And do you stop kindergarten grants, or do you stop the vocational reimbursement program? Do you stop the life science grants, or do you stop some funding for the MBTA? I mean, these are choices that we're going to have to make as we move forward with the budget.
But at the end of the day, there's a fixed pot of money.
That's
It's
it.
not like you're going to raise taxes.
No.
And it's not like you're going to print money like our fine brethren do down south. You don't have the option to go print more Massachusetts dollars.
No, we don't want to borrow operational monies. We had that issue in the Department of Transportation, and part of the transportation reform was to say we're not going to put 85% of our employees on bonds. That's not a good idea. So moving away from that cost us $225 million operational, but we had to do that. It was ridiculous to be borrowing the money to pay those people. So those are the kinds of, and that goes all the way back to the Romney administration, and it took that long to try and work out the solution to that problem, and dealing with a 4-year recession in the middle of it. But
Didn't help.
Didn't help. So these are the things, that we go through every year, and it'll sort itself out. I actually think that the chairs of Ways and Means and their staff and folks that work on it do a pretty good job of making recommendations as we go in and advocate for our priorities.
I mean, realistically, whether you give me more Chapter 70 money, more Chapter 90, or you cut here, I kind of look at how much money am I getting from the state as the town of Milford, because, as you've said, I think the state pays 40, we'll get into it later, but 47% of what it costs to educate a child. So if you cut my special needs and you increase my 47, But then you don't give me highway, somehow when I do all that, I sit there and say, no, wait a minute. How much money do we have coming in? Because we're going to do the same thing.
Right.
You know, there's going to be people who ask, do we need full-day kindergarten? A lot of us are going to sit there and say, it's a good thing. If we don't get 150 or 175, whatever the number is, from the state, we got to really think about, do we want to eliminate that service? And the answer is probably no, because it's a good thing. So then you look over there and say, okay, where else are we going to find money? You know, on a micro scale from what you're doing in Beacon Hill. But
It's all the same process, though. It's the same process we all go through. We go through it in our homes.
Yeah.
You know, what do we want to do? What's our demand, right? What are all the things we want to do? The vacations we want to take, the roof we want to fix, the backyard
Michael
we want
needs
to
a
do
new
this,
car.
the money we want,
Okay.
the food we want to buy, the car we want to buy. What are these demands? And can we, on the money we take in on a weekly basis, afford to do these
And if you
things?
can, if you got to, the Department of Michael, the Department of Liz needs this, you got to find from some other department.
Or something goes undone.
Yeah.
And that's the priority setting we go through. You then do it at the state level, you do it at the local level, and you stay within the budget, and that's what you do, and those are the priorities you set. So, you know, there are certain things. I mean, libraries got cut or level funded. You know, these are things where I look at these programs and I say, which ones can we really say we deliver the best bang for the buck that satisfies the public policy priority that we set? Elders are important to us. Senior citizen centers deliver when we give them money. Libraries are important to people who don't have means of access to other ways to get information, and even for people who do have means of access to get to information, libraries help to sort through that information. They're a very valuable tool. What are we going to do with them? Education, transportation, keep going. There's a disconnect out there, I certainly find at times, where people feel, give me more, tax me less. I can't do that. We keep driving efficiencies. We keep trying to find the fraud. We keep trying to stay ahead of the
John,
cheats.
I want world peace.
We do it.
You know, give me more, tax me less. I want world peace.
And that's
It's a noble concept.
It is, and we do try and do more with what we have. That is part of it, but it is a situation where we're constantly looking for efficiencies. We're constantly trying to drive the fraud out of it, the cheating out of it, and that's what we're going to keep doing. You know, the governor has made a commitment in this cycle that he wants to get at redetermination of eligibility of people who are receiving health benefits, mass health benefits. A fair enough approach. We're coming out of the recession. There were people who went on mass health during the recession who may not belong there any longer. We're talking about, you know, a recent report came out that suggested we're not doing the job we should be doing, getting people who are on our welfare programs to work. We're not doing that effectively, and we need to do it better.
One of the lowest states in
We were one of the
percentage.
first to go to work requirement, and the most recent reports suggest we're in the lower categories of states with effective programs that are getting people off to work. Why is that? What is it about our program that isn't working? Let's get at it. Let's get people back to work. The economy's better. The jobs are out there. The opportunities are there. I mean, I hear from people. I want to work. I go out to work. I get a minimum wage. I do it for 25 or 40 hours a week. Guess what's going to happen to me? I'm going to lose my child care benefit. I'm going to lose my food stamps. I'm going to lose these benefits so that actually the total of what I earn
If I go to work is less.
Than, or it's going to start breaking where I can't go to work because I've lost my child care benefit and I'm not making enough money to pay for my child care benefits. So what do? Those are the kinds of dynamic you have. It's not just about people who won't get out and go to work. Sometimes it's about balancing that out. We're sophisticated enough to understand that problem, and we're sophisticated enough to get after the solution to it. I think this governor is committed to putting a priority on it, and I think this legislature is committed
Well, we're
to putting a priority
starting to see
on it.
some movement from the market.
Yeah.
You know, where you start seeing larger companies move the minimum wage to $9.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not really, I mean, I look around, I see the Dunkin' Donuts windows. They're not advertising $7. They're already moving up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good step in the right direction.
The market's moving. The number one complaint we get from employers is the ability to find reliable workers who can fill jobs. Certainly the high-tech, advanced manufacturing jobs, they need a skill set, and we're trying to deliver on the programs that I was talking about that we need to fund to train people to get them to work, and we're very effective at that. We have some really very good programs doing that, 20-week, 8-week programs that are turning out machinists that go from long-term unemployed to $35 an hour with 3 job offers.
Right.
I mean, it's amazing what we can
All
do
of a
in
sudden,
combination.
you've got people making 50, 60 grand a year, and you sit there and say,
Creating a middle
this
class
is good.
again. Creating a middle class again. At the same time, entry-level jobs where people are willing to train themselves. The problem is some of the workers don't have the work ethic to say, not only will I be here today, I'll be here tomorrow, and I'll be here tomorrow on time, and I'll leave on time. And getting that reliable worker has been a problem. I mean, unemployment dropped down to 5% in Massachusetts. That was the report last week. So we're doing well. Now, we understand there are underemployed, there are people who are out of the market, but we've still dropped into the reported numbers at that level. Employers are telling us there's a problem filling the jobs. And our advantage in keeping employers here who have high utility costs is the workforce.
Is the
It's our
high-skilled workforce.
transportation. It's access to market. People, businesses want access to market, so they want to be where the market is. They want to be where the skilled labor is. They want to be, and they're willing to pay a little bit more. But skilled labor, access to market, transportation, affordable housing, these are all the things that make businesses want to be where they
Now,
are.
John, just to close this out, if we put everything together, last year I got $100 from the state as the town of Milford.
Mhm.
What am I going to get this year?
You're going to get the 100 plus.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident in that. You know,
I mean,
when
that
look
is
around,
great
you know, when-
news for us.
Yeah, Chapter 90's gone up. We passed the legislation last year that the governor wouldn't release the money. We went from what used to be a few years ago 150 million statewide to 200 million, and we passed a bond bill that went to 300 million. The governor wouldn't release, Governor Patrick wouldn't release that last 100 million. One of the first things that Governor Baker did taking office was say, I'm going to release that 100 million. So there's, you know, more money for the town of Milford coming in through road monies. Local aid's going to go up. I think we did 25 million last year. I think he's proposed 35 million this year, and I think we're going to try and hold to that. So there'll be, you know, municipal side money that will go up. The 100 million, there'll be more money hopefully in chapter
If we
70
hold our
education combined.
$100 or a little bit more, that's great news.
Yeah, that's I think local communities should be in decent shape coming out of
Now,
this.
on a darker side, we're hearing about an opiate problem in the area.
We're not just hearing about it, we're living it and seeing it. It's pretty serious.
For the people who don't really understand it, what is the problem?
Heroin's cheaper than marijuana. The problem, the genesis of the problem comes from a lot of different things. We will hear about the overprescription of pain drugs to particularly young people, athletes that get injured.
And we hear they get hooked and then it's too expensive to buy the Percocets or whatever. So
The
they go out and buy
OxyContin, they can't get
Oxy.
access to. So
They go and buy
street
heroin?
drugs. They buy street drugs because the street drugs are cheaper. And it's a very serious problem right now. We have a lot of young people who have turned to using the drugs. They're dangerous, highly addictive, and life-threatening. In part, one of the problems we have beyond this growing addiction problem that comes out of painkillers, comes out of boredom, whatever leads them to the street drug, and with the street drug being cheap, is that it's being cut with dangerous chemicals. Whether it's
You
the
know, I
lidocaine or
I got to tell you, I heard something on the news that stunned me. Well, you have bad things being added to heroin. And I'm sitting there saying, wait a minute, are you telling me heroin is a good thing? You know, when they talk about cutting it with horse tranquilizer, what are they referring to?
well, nobody wants to do pure heroin. You might do it once and you'll never do it again because you're not going to survive it. But there's a cutting of all drugs that are in that form, to whether it's cocaine or whether it's heroin, to increase the street value by cutting it back. But what we're seeing is a couple of things. We're seeing a cut for street value, and we're seeing a cut because they can cut it with something that'll accelerate the high. The point of it all is that it's getting mixed with other drugs that are extremely dangerous to the people who are taking it, or chemicals that are dangerous, and we're getting deaths. And you can't get somebody off an addiction if they're dead. And we're seeing that on a statewide basis. We're seeing it on a nationwide basis. But we're concerned about Milford. We're concerned about the communities I represent. We're concerned about the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Worse than
and
when we
finding
were
a
kids?
solution. Yeah, it is.
Because, I mean, when we were kids, you knew it was there.
Yeah, it's worse.
It was even Johnny Carson made fun of us.
Yeah. No, this is a switching in dynamic where it's just available at an unreasonably low price, and it makes it easy for people to turn to these drugs as a drug of choice. And once addicted and hooked on it, it's a dangerous cycle. So we've done a couple of things. I mean, we passed some legislation last year to address, over the last couple of years, to address mental health, to address addiction, to try and address prevention, making counseling available through medical insurance, making more beds available, more counselors available, to try and hit the prevention side of this thing. But it's a serious problem, and we're not there yet in terms of solving it. And you're seeing, the good thing is we're seeing a lot of people come together to try and address this. District Attorney Early established a task force recently to address it. Tom O'Loughlin's working on that.
Our chief is on it.
Yeah. Amy Leone, who's a person in this community who's deeply involved in prevention organizations and efforts, very much working with families and community members who have an interest to try and get them organized, to say, how can we address this? How can we not recreate the wheel here, but understand there's a wheel spinning over there that if we just get on board with, we can help. So it's a community problem, and we're trying to address it in a community way.
Well, from a naive point of view, we grew up with the war on drugs. Just say no. I mean, it seems like decades and decades we've been fighting this battle. I'm looking down the tunnel. Is there a light? And if there's a light, does it sound like it's going choo-choo coming at me?
It's a big problem, and it's growing, and we want to address it. Look, you and I grew up invincible and invisible, right? And I always worried about my kids growing up invisible and invincible,
yes,
because that's what you think you are. That there's nobody's going to see what you're doing, and nothing's going to harm you. You can live through anything. It's not true. But try and convince an 18, 19, 20-year-old that that's the case, and it's hard. So people are going to do things. There's not a piece of legislation to stop something, criminally or otherwise, that we've ever passed that has been 100% successful.
You can't legislate stupid.
You can't legislate it away, but we can address it, and it is somewhat prevention and it's somewhat enforcement. I had a conversation with the chief judge of the Supreme Court, and I said, look, one of the things I'm not happy about is that if we've got street dealers, we're talking about criminal penalties and whether we should be doing away with minimum mandatory sentencing for small-time drug dealers. And I say, well, wait a minute, let me look at this from a different perspective. If we've got street dealers who aren't really trafficking, but distributing, but what they're distributing isn't, marijuana, and it's not even just the regular version of heroin, but it's a version that's cut with something that's dangerous, should there be an enhanced penalty? Should we be taking a harder look at that aspect of this to put some punch into telling the dealers out there, it's going to make a difference to us, what you put on the street. Not the quantity of it, which is what is the quantity or the class of it, because we classify the drugs, A, B, C, D, but it's not just the quantities and the classification, but maybe within the classifications, we're not going to be so much concerned just about quantity, but what you're doing, what's in that drug, what's in that thing we're classifying as heroin that might make it more dangerous than what that guy just sold over there.
So even normal market forces where you say a pure product, a lower cost, you're not even dealing with that because you're saying if somebody got pure heroin, they'd probably overdose.
Well, it's very possible, yeah. I mean, it's not,
You know,
never
it's-
what you're going to get out there.
Well, no, but I'm just, thinking that it's not the normal market dynamic that you can use against these people.
No, the market dynamic is there's always going to be somebody else out there looking for it. And once you're addicted, the quick high, the accelerated high that comes from knowing you're even buying an adulterated drug is something you're looking for. It's that we're not talking about a reasoning process here that you're going to accept
Right.
as being wise.
Yes,
that
we want to
someone's
go
going
through a
through.
logical
Yeah, you're not
market
gonna get there.
analysis,
Yes.
and it's
It's
not the
there.
same.
That's not what it is. That's not what we're dealing with here. So those forces are pretty strong. It's a very serious problem, and I think we're trying to take and continuing to take a very serious look at how to address it.
Another legislative question that's got me confused. Early retirement. I mean, we looked at this years ago, and when health costs were nominal, you could take a $60,000 player and retire them, hire a $30,000 player, and you had a nice little break there. But what I've seen in the last 10 years or so is the 60 really cost you 80 because you got $20,000 worth of health benefits. So you're taking an 80, retiring, making it a 20, then you're adding a 40 plus their 20, a 60, and that little sliver of 20,000 within 3 years because of steps, lanes, jigs, and all sorts of other dances, all of a sudden you haven't saved any money.
Yeah, early retirement at a point where salaries were low and cost of benefits were low and people weren't living as long,
Which is true.
maybe made some sense. We've seen in recent decade or more that early retirements haven't been the return on investment that we would hope they would be. So recently, as part of the governor's package, the governor wants to reduce the workforce by approximately 5,000 workers. That's what he feels we can take out of the workforce. He's prepared to lay them off if the money's not there to fund them. He's looking for, quote, a more humane way to do that. Humane also meaning that maybe we can be a little more selective and not necessarily take out our newer workers if seniority is a factor in some of these labor contracts that we have. So he's looking at a different way to do this. And so he wants to add 5 years of service of 5 years of age, which in the parlance of state retirement programs means somebody could go from 60% of retirement, 60% of salary retirement to an 80% of salary retirement, which is the maximum. So it is an encouragement for people to say, yeah, I'll go. I'm near. I could work another 5 years or I could leave now.
But that makes more sense. You're really talking about a rift, a reduction in force that I'm accomplishing by the early retirement.
That's what he's trying to do, because as opposed to the typical early retirement where I retire out my older worker and I bring a younger worker in at a lower salary, that's the equation that started to collapse that you
Right.
were describing, where that younger worker, either because it's a specialty position like a math teacher in a school system, I can't get him at step one, I may be paying as much or near what I was retiring out the other worker at. There still may be value to that. You want a younger, more energetic worker with a different, more modern approach
But
to it.
it's not a
whatever.
monetary.
But it doesn't become monetary at
consideration.
that point. The governor's proposal is unique in that what he said is we will only replace 20% this year of the workers that we retire out. So the savings will be within that 20% hopefully anyway, that you replace that 1 in 5 workers, but the greater savings, the $170 million he wants to save, will come from not replacing the 80%. And the question was, well, Governor, for how long? Well, maybe 20% a year for 5 years. And then the question becomes, well, what if it's not the right workers? What if it's not? What if it's overloaded into DCF? Are you really not going to replace all the DCF workers? We just put a whole bunch of new DCF workers in place because we were concerned about caseloads. How are we going to handle that? So look, in the effort to be cooperative with the governor and try and move this along at a timeline whether we know that $170 million is going to be real for this year's budget, the House moved along his proposal almost exactly as is. We moved it along this past week to the Senate. The Senate's taken a pretty hard look at it. There were some hearings, I think either today or yesterday, where they took some really tough shots at it along the line of what I was just saying is, does this work? Who's going to be replaced? How soon along the line? Are we not going to grow government at all during this time? Where are we going to grow it? These are all legitimate questions, and I'm not sure they have all the legitimate answers. We've moved it along to get the debate moving because it's got to get somewhere. But we'll see whether this comes together. I'm not a huge fan of early retirement. This is a compromise in my view to say, Governor, you're looking to set some priorities. I'm willing to work with you. And if this is where you think you can really make this work, and you're only going to come back with 20% a year, fine, but you got some details to work out here.
I guess I'm okay with the idea that you're eliminating 4,000 out of 5,000 jobs. As long as it's not a blanket, every department gets 100 jobs.
Those are the details he hasn't quite gotten into at this point.
Because we hear about child services, you hear about the court system.
Right. Well, it's only, see, this is the thing, it's only executive branch, so he has some control over it.
Okay.
Well, can you expand this to the court system? Didn't I just tell you our courts are in trouble already? If we were to lay off 5 workers and be only able to replace one, the courts would be closing doors, absolutely closing doors. You know, we can't extend it down into local communities. We can't extend it down into grant
child
programs.
Services, you hear how kids are falling through the net, not because you have employees who don't care, who won't work.
It's caseloads.
It's just the weight of the caseload.
Right.
You know, John, you want to do a good job here, carry 400 pounds. You can try your hardest, but those 400 pounds aren't going to fit in your knapsack.
These are details we're trying to get worked out with him as we get to, this will allow the Senate to do something a little different. It'll come back in conference. The governor's going to have to answer some questions, and we'll see what we can do if we can get it done in time for the budget, if it works. So we'll be going at that, but those are all legitimate questions. You know, people said, can you make a federal grant program? It's like, well, no. If we lay off a federal grant worker, we're just losing the money.
Well, I was going to say, the worst thing we've ever done in our lives,
it's not going to work.
When we did it to school, was lay off the grant writers.
Right.
So we saved a whole 80,000, and 400,000 that year didn't come in.
Yeah, there are certain things so it's a limited program, limited in numbers, limited to the executive branch, limited to certain group workers within the executive branch, and you know, I'll give them the credit that it's an initiative worth consideration, and we'll see where it goes.
We talked a lot about ELL in the first part of the show, you know, the John Fernandes informal. But from a budgeting standpoint, is it safe to say that out of the 300 communities, about 30 of us are carrying the heavy water?
That's probably a fair number, although I'm not exactly sure. That's something we're going to try and figure out here. ELL being English language learners. You know, there was a ballot initiative passed a number of years ago that required immersion, a change in our programs. Very controversial, a lot of pushback on it, and a lot of belief it was going to be very expensive and that it was going to be questionable in its ability to be successful because it really became a one-size-fit-all. I think we're seeing some of that play out today in the way the mandate is being executed by the department to try and meet those timelines of getting people out within, I think it's 3 years, whatever the number is. So there's a significant effort to try and get English language learners English competencies ASAP. Within the formula that creates our foundation budget, there are line items for kindergarten students and for middle school students and high school students and vocational students and special ed students, and there's one for English language learners. And however many kids are in each category times the allocation for that category is what your foundation budget becomes, and then based upon your wealth and property values, you get a reimbursement of a certain percent of that total. So if you have 100 English language learners and we think it costs $9,500 to educate one, you're going to get 9,500 times 100 as your budget, and we're going to send you 47 cents on the dollar.
But isn't the real issue that we're saying it costs $9,500 for a Milford High kid? Now, once they're here, they bleed Milford red, they are Milford kids. But we're saying, wait a minute, somebody who's never had any formal education or very little, someone who doesn't speak English, doesn't take an average level of resource to bring them up to speed quickly. Isn't the real question in people's minds, what's the real number?
You know, yes, in some respects, that's the question across the board. Yeah, I served on the Milford School Committee for 9 years and over at Blackstone Valley for 7. The debate between homogeneous groupings and heterogeneous groupings was one that went on and on and on.
And always will.
And always will. What does that mean? Well, do we group kids by competency, or do we mix them all together? So you have slower learners with gifted students. Why would you do that? It's going to slow down the gifted student. It's going to put too much pressure on the slower learner student. Well, no, you put them together heterogeneously because we want the stronger learner to help the weaker learner, not just group them. And so
it's not a drive to mediocrity.
And you don't want to trap any learner in a particular designation. So you go, and that's the debate. Well, we can move quicker, we can be more efficient if it's all homogeneous versus heterogeneous. Well, we settled that debate when I was on the committee, and we're saying we're going heterogeneously. So within that grouping, whether it's English competent learners or English learners, there's going to be this mix of students. What does it take to educate a special needs child? What does it take to educate a gifted child? What does it take to educate a child who doesn't have resources at home to help? Doesn't have the laptop, doesn't have the iPad, doesn't have the two parents at home, doesn't have the educated parent at home.
Or does have the parents like ours.
Yeah.
My parents, as much as they wanted to, you
Couldn't
lay
help you
down
with-
algebra in front of them or
Couldn't help you with
calculus.
the algebra. I hate to say this, but despite leaving as a math major, I couldn't help my kids with algebra either. But the point is that every child is learning at a different level, and we like to say it's the consequence of grouping the cost of educating each of those children that gets you to some baseline. So the hope is that when you say $9,500 for an ELL learner, or $9,000 for a high schooler, or $8,000 for a middle schooler, and $7,500 for a kindergarten, that you're sort of balancing those numbers and saying, we think you ought to be able to educate a child for this amount of money. Now the debate is that really true? Not just for Milford, but is that true statewide? Is our foundation budget formula really one that reflects the cost of education today? And that's a very heated debate, mainly because we know the outcome will likely be, well, we got to increase it, and who's got the money to do that?
Right.
So why put the pressure on ourselves? But that's a debate. So when we talk about driving it back to Milford and saying, is that $9,500 the right number for Milford? Well, I don't know. You can figure that out maybe by saying what you're actually spending. But we do look at that. We look at those numbers and say, should it be more? What are we doing within our system? So every system tries to address this in their own way. You know, you have the freedom to say, okay, I got to get X number of minutes in a day to a child. How am I going to get those minutes in? Set up your program. Do I have one teacher and two aides? Do I have a dedicated teacher? Do I have the kids in a classroom where I've got a bilingual teacher? What am I doing? How am I handling this?
Well, I mean, I challenge the school candidates, the school committee candidates, that if they are elected, they have an education task in front of them, which one is to educate themselves on, okay, you're telling me it's going to cost $500,000 more because of these extra ELL burdens. Well, learn the real numbers, the facts. Then they've got to educate you, and especially the 29 other John Fernandes who are directly affected, to say, look, John, it's not $9,500 for one of these kids who's come in and doesn't have it. It's X. And give you the ammunition so you can go up in front of 270 other towns that aren't feeling it.
Well, that's true. But the other part of it is, any saying that you need another $500,000 today doesn't mean you're already spending $9,500 per child. It may be that the way you take your overall budget and spread it around, there's more within the budget that could be directed, but then you're going to be, you've directed it someplace else already. So you want to, as a school system and as a finance committee and as a community, not necessarily look at what the state tells you you must spend as your minimum per child. You should look at what do we think we ought to spend per child, and if we have the ability to drive additional resources in over the minimum that the state says we should be spending, should we drive those resources in? And if we can, like you were just saying about kindergarten, look, if we said it cost $8,500 a child for kindergarten, and you were spending $8,500 a child for kindergarten, but you wanted a program that cost you $9,000 per child, then the question is, do I want to spend $9,000?
Yeah, and to me, that minimum net school spending, that keeps me from running afoul of the state government.
Well, it keeps you from running afoul of the constitutional obligation to educate every child, which led to education reform in the first place, the Hancock case, which was about to have a Supreme Court say, you are in noncompliance with our Constitution unless
But
you
John,
offer an equal education to every
what you hit is more
child.
profound.
Yeah.
We decide what we should spend on our children. And last year we allocated an extra $600,000 the year before because SPED went up. The state doesn't say you have to. It says you have to take care of this part of the population so you can cut from the typical learners. And we as a community got up and said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to shift more of the pot. So, I mean, the minimum are nice, but I agree with you. We decide what we want to spend for Milford and then figure out how much of it can we afford.
Right, and that's why, I'm working with, folks in the Milford school system, school committee members and the administration, and there's some really good people within the administration who care about education of the child, blind to any of the politics that may be swirling around them as to whose obligation it is or anything else. And they are the folks we should be listening to in terms of what's the right program to educate this child, because the child's in the system. We want to produce a child that's going to be productive in our society and has that equal opportunity for education. The difficulty becomes when we say, this is a state mandate and it's costing us too much money. You really want to evaluate whether within that $9,500 that we say you ought to be spending, are you spending that today? Are you spending more? Because if you're spending more, educate us to that so we can pressure to change the formula so that there'll be a higher reimbursement if that's what it takes. The other part of it is when populations fluctuate the way they do in Milford and seem to go up dramatically from year to year, we're always 1 year behind counting last year's to this year's funding. So I did file legislation to try and create a circuit breaker for that. And we'll see. We're going to recruit legislators from other communities that may have the same problem
And that, to
see
me,
if we can have a discussion about that.
That makes sense because if on a national level, and I've always said it's really easy to talk about turn these kids away. I don't know that I could stand on the border, look at some little kid who says, "Mister, would you help me, please?" and say, "You're not worthy, go away." So we're going to take these kids in. And if the bulk of the responsibility falls on 10% of our towns, circuit breaker feels right.
Yeah, I agree.
You're not going to say no. I just can't.
Well, there are no's that are said. I know people don't believe that, but there are these processing centers where people come across. I mean, first of all, there's been a better effort made to stop the flow.
Sure.
And secondly, the processing centers do send some folks back. But the ones they release because this family in the community someplace else that they can release into while they process whether they really do have a claim to stay here or not. We're not just talking about 18-year-olds, we're talking about younger kids, and it's a range and there is a process. Unfortunately, the national system is broken. There's no question about it.
But we can't legislate
immigration
in Milford.
And I don't think I hear anybody in a position of responsibility arguing that. I think, I listened to a school committee meeting where this debate took place, and, I was encouraged to hear every school committee member who spoke take the position we have an obligation to educate the children that are here. And I heard every administrator speak saying, here are our plans to do that. What I heard was a debate about where should the money come from and why should it come from there, and is this an unfunded mandate, an underfunded mandate, a completely funded mandate? What is it? Well, let's get at that debate. That's fine enough. Let's talk about where the money should be coming from, is coming from, and if there's enough of a mix of contribution between the state and the local community, and let's
But, you
change it if we need to change it.
proud when you sit there and say, number one, we are going to educate these kids. They're now Milford kids. Yes, I'm going to complain, John, say I want more money. Because if I wasn't, then I'm not doing my job to represent, our residents. But at the end of the day, whether we get the extra money or not, that'll deal with the level of complaint, the noise. But like you say, I haven't seen one person say, we're not going to take care of Milford kids.
Yeah, and remember, before the recession hit, almost every community in Massachusetts was spending 105, 110, 120% of foundation. People recognized that, this was buying the small Fiat and this was buying the larger sedan. And we wanted the larger sedan because we think it gave our kids a better opportunity to get cross-country to the job they want to get to. So that debate is never going to stop. We're going to have some foundational responsibility to spend a certain amount of money per child, because hanging over our head is the SJC ready to judge at any time. We have the constitutional obligation, and they will put in place a mandated program of how we will do this to educate equally every child in Massachusetts.
I don't believe we'll ever need that in Milford.
And I don't think we will ever need it in Massachusetts, because we did respond to it back in the 90s. We continue to respond to it today. But that's always going to be some minimum mandatory spending, and it's going to come with some division of responsibility between the community and the state. We are always going to look beyond that as responsible community members, finance committee members, school committee members, and say, we need to do a little bit more.
And as always, stay tuned. This was an extra long two-part as we went through some of the background and now some of the issues. But the next show, and when we get closer to finalizing a budget, we'll see how the numbers pan out. Thank you for the good fight. And to our 6 loyal viewers, everyone out there that's watching, may God bless. May tomorrow be a better day than today. Thank you.